The truth about China and what the rest of the world can learn from China's rise. Hey everyone, I'm Jason Smith, originally from sunny California, now living in beautiful Beijing. Today's guest is SL Kanthan, a columnist, blogger, and podcaster, and host of Geopolitics Demystified on YouTube. Welcome back to the Bridge to China.
Thank you, Jason. It's always a pleasure chatting with you. And you ask really smart questions.
Yeah,
it makes me think.
Yeah, well, you post really excellent content. It makes me think. I follow you regularly. You are a very interesting and influential person on social media. I wanted to ask, in the context of Sino-U.S. relations, about India. Actually, I want to talk about, firstly, about your goal. So you live in India, but a large part of your online presence relates to China. So I want to know a little bit about what your purpose is. Is it to diffuse Sino-Indian relations, or you're hoping that maybe India and China can learn from one another? How would you characterize?
Both, and then also China is a force to reckon with, right? It's a superpower, and very likely it's going to be the most, influential nation in this century. I'm fascinated by China, and I want my country to learn from China, and I want the world to learn about China, and especially the U.S., which is the reigning superpower. But I see so many misunderstandings, as you would know, where you're from the U.S. and you take a lot of heat for talking about China. So, and that's important for the world. The U.S. and China should get along, and my country, India, should get along with China. And my country has a lot to learn from China. A lot of people in my country don't want to hear that. But, for example, we had a power outage today, and I told you that I may not be able to make the interview. And that's a basic problem in India. We have a lot of problems with the fundamental the infrastructure, basic stuff like, roads, electricity, blah, blah. And we cannot really progress at a rapid pace if we are still struggling with basic stuff like this, which really affects productivity. And, for example, our Prime Minister talks a lot about Make in India, to boost manufacturing, which is a great idea. But if you have a foreigner visiting India and he's having a power outage like, once a day, he's going to be wondering, well, how can I have a factory if the country cannot provide me with a lot of electricity? And if the roads are bad, it takes a long time to move things for the manufacturing. If the seaports are not good, yada yada. So yeah, that's my goal.
So it looks like you're because I want to understand this too. When I look at India, I see incredible GDP growth, better than China's actually in the last a few years. So it looks like there's so much potential for, is the 1.3 billion people working together to make an incredible country and an incredible future. So what are the bottlenecks? What's preventing India from becoming an infrastructure giant like China?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, the first thing is there's something about my people who don't want to recognize the problems, So it's like, if you go to, the Alcoholics Anonymous, the first step is to say, yes, well, I am an alcoholic, right? So you need to acknowledge what is the problem. And if I, bring up the infrastructure problems, people don't say, "Oh yeah, okay. So here are the four things we should do to fix it." Well, no, they will go on like a random topic about, they'll just change the topic, like they'll go to British, yeah, we were under the British, past history, or they'll say, oh, it's actually getting better, it's great, it's not too bad. Or they will say, oh, buy a backup generator to fix electricity. Or, like they will just find excuses to not address the problem. And I really don't know why that is. It's really a serious problem. For example, like we have stray dogs in India. Okay, it's really a pain. We have 70 million stray dogs, and I cannot jog. Because once I leave my block, those dogs, they don't know me. And then they'll be ready to bite me. And if I have to go to the gym at 6 in the morning, I have to carry the pepper spray because once I leave my block, the rest of the dogs are so crazy. I'm so scared to go to the gym in the morning. So, but why is this? This is a solvable problem, and this is a needless problem. This problem should not exist. So we have a lot of things like that where, like one of the things may be like the rich people have a very good life, So if you're in the top 1%, you live in gated communities, you don't have a power outage, you don't see stray dogs, and you live a beautiful life. You buy a Tesla or a Porsche, and you don't feel the pain. I think maybe that's an issue, and we don't have like a socialist philosophy, right? In China, it's like they'll go to the poorest village, and they will spend like $50 million fixing the roads. They will have 5G. And I've been to China, and I've driven like maybe 1,000 kilometer throughout China. So I've seen a lot of villages, the rural areas, and they look wonderful, Like you go to the smallest town in China, they'll have perfect roads, beautiful parks, no trash, no graffiti, no homeless, no crime, beautiful sidewalks, wonderful, the infrastructure. And that's something that all countries should learn, because once you take care of the poor, that raises the whole nation. It's better for GDP, it's better for stability,
Your answer, the first step to is to acknowledge that there's a problem, is identical in my case, where you're talking about China to a lot of people in India. I'm talking about China to people in the United States. And as an American, I know what America's like. I grew up there collecting baseball cards in the suburbs, watching American TV on the carpet. I know what it's like to be an American. I come to China and I look around and I say, oh, that's really nice. And I say, hey, guys, on X, which is largely an American platform. I say, hey, this is something great. We could have that too. People are like, no, that's not real. It's all fake. It doesn't exist. Like, you're lying. It's like, whoa, it's impossible to even present the case that there's something better in China in some cases about some things to my American brothers and sisters, because they, not everyone, but many refuse to accept that it's real, like that China has state-of-the-art infrastructure, humanoid robots, amazing bridges, incredible infrastructure. If you try to tell that to a lot of people, a lot of Americans just say, you're making it up, or that's a lie, or they'll present an alternate video where they filmed something in 2015 of a homeless person, or so. It's just ridiculous. So I think you're very right to point out the first step is to acknowledge, hey, we could be doing something better. But oftentimes that is the most difficult part of the conversation. I want to talk about geopolitics. That's really what you do. And you mentioned the big show is U.S.-Sino relations. So in the last decade or so, we've seen this relationship has been very fraught, and maybe not so much. Sometimes it's worse, sometimes it's better. Is there a way back, in your opinion? Do you think Trump's search for a win will play out when President Xi and President Trump meet in April?
So, there are two ways to look at geopolitics. One is a philosophical approach, and then the other is the real politic. So, so people like you and me, we would tend to go on the philosophical side, right? Like we kind of, we should learn from one another, we should coexist, we should cooperate, we should seek win-win situation, we should be friends. So that's the philosophical approach, and that's good. So the world needs some people like us to focus on that and to not let that forget. But then there's the real politic, right? Like you look at the struggle for power and domination between the nations. And you have like trillions of dollars in play, right? So when China wins, when China has a deep seek, then somebody, the board of directors and the shareholders of OpenAI and Google and Microsoft, they're thinking, oh my God, we're going to lose we're going to lose $5 trillion in market cap. Right? And then when Huawei succeeds, then people, they have a lobbyist and they go, no, we cannot let Huawei be the number one smartphone. Right? Which it was for a very brief moment in late 2018, early 2019. Huawei was the number one smartphone in the world. It had surpassed Apple and Samsung. So, and then they basically decided to crush Huawei. Right? So there is, and then there is the geopolitical, regional struggle for domination. So there are people way higher up, in say the U.S. military, the banks. Then they go, no, we cannot let China be the number one power like in Asia. We cannot let China, rule these sectors, take away the GDP, take away the technology. We cannot let China have a more powerful military than we do. So they think in terms of, the world domination. And they've been used to that since World War II. And there are lots of benefits for the U.S. leaders in being number one. So you have the dollar as the world reserve currency. And that's a very, very powerful tool. It not only lets the U.S. borrow trillions of dollars and be rich, it's also able to control the nations, right? So just by the threat of sanctions, they can say, well, if you do this, we will not let you have access to the US dollar. And that totally ruins a nation's economy. like Venezuela. Their GDP fell like 70%. So these sanctions are very powerful tools to control the nation. So from that point of view, the U.S.-China relations is going to be very hard because one is not going to. It's like with two lions in a mountain. It's going to be very hard. So it needs great wisdom. So it can be done. They can sit together and figure out a new security architecture, and maybe the G7 and the BRICS nations. And there has to be some kind of power sharing and understanding and a little bit of the compromise. They can say, okay, China and Russia, we will let you do this and do that and have sovereignty and prosperity, but in return you have to give us this, and so on.
Well, I think the best understanding of compromise is everyone loses. And it's the only way to win. But, what do the U.S. and China have to gain by working together? What benefits are there for China to working with the U.S.? What benefits are there for the U.S. working with China? Why is it that these two nations, despite attempting to decouple from one another, remain partners today?
Yeah. So they cannot, okay. So there are lots of wonderful things about the U.S. There are a lot of strengths and wonderful things about the U.S. And there are a lot of wonderful things about China, and they have a lot of strengths, And the beauty of that is, once you take the feelings and the emotions out of the picture, and then you see they actually kind of are like complementary. There are a lot of strengths and weaknesses that perfectly fit together to make a really good team. The Americans are really wonderful in visionary things. Just look at the last 70, 80 years. Of all the greatest the technologies that we take for granted, they came from the U.S. The computer, the internet, smartphones, as we know right now, GPS, whatever you can think of. So many great things. They came out of the U.S. And robots and Chat GPT, right? AI. There was an American in the 1950s, and he thought of the artificial intelligence, and he laid the foundations for the artificial intelligence. And all the breakthroughs, like GPUs, that make the AI possible. The hardware part, the software part, what is deep learning. It all came out of the U.S. So the U.S. is very good in vision, breakthrough technologies, but the problem in the U.S. is it's run by neoliberal Wall Street financial capitalism, right? And they're just so obsessed with profits, right? Whatever they do, it has to return. It has to have a huge return for the shareholders, right? But that's not the way to run a whole country. And that's why they totally forgot about the rare earths, right? Because mining rare earths, you're not going to become a billionaire by mining rare earths. You're not going to make a lot of money in manufacturing things. And you don't want to invest in PhDs who, may work for 5 years and may have nothing to show for, So the Wall Street types, they don't have patience for that. So what happens? Now China leads the world in scientific papers. So they publish a lot more scientific papers than the U.S. They have a lot more, patents. China files more patents than the rest of the world combined. And even if you look at the prestigious patents, which are applicable throughout the world and not just China. That's filed at WIPO at the UN. And even in that, the prestigious patents, China leads the world now. It's like 30% or something more than the US. And you can look at whatever sector, right? China makes 70% of the electric cars, 90% of the solar panels, 100% of some of the rare earths, batteries, so many categories. China leads the world, if you don't know the answer for something about China, you can just say 70%, and you'll be pretty close. So, yeah. So, if you have the U.S., China working together, wow, that'll be fantastic for both countries and the world.
Yeah, that kind of answers one of the questions I wanted to ask. How does the developing world benefit from Sino-U.S. relations? But I think you kind of did answer that. There's so many benefits from that the world has already gained from some of the technologies that have come out of the United States. And now that China is participating in that endeavor as part of the manufacturing base, it seems like everyone benefits. Media in the U.S. often depict China as villainous, a militarized threat to the world. How do you see China's relationship with the region? How is China perceived by the region, and how is China actually behaving in the region? In Greater Asia.
That's kind of a tricky question, and it's also sensitive. But to be frank, China has to understand that the more powerful it gets, the more scared the neighbors will be. Because that's just geopolitics. Real geopolitics. So if China has the world's largest navy, then a lot of the neighbors are in South China Sea are going to be worried. So and think of the manufacturing capability of China. If China wants to make 1,000 missiles a day, it probably can. It's like a fantastic manufacturing, and but think of how the U.S. did in World War II, where the Ford, the car factories were turned into making weapons for the U.S. military. And the U.S. did amazing things in World War II. Like they would build a ship, like a huge warship, in like 4 days or something. There was this one record where I think it was like 1.5 days. Okay, so that was the U.S.
Wow.
Okay, now the U.S. cannot build a ship even if you put a gun to the head. But those were the glorious days of America when people could actually get things done, and they knew the wonders of manufacturing. But now China is like that, So if there's a war, the BYD factories can be churning like 1,000 missiles a day, and China also has the technology, like we see those beautiful drones, they look so beautiful, but if there is a war, those drones could be, they could be used to attack. So the more powerful China gets, it has to be more diplomatic, and to reassure its neighbors that, hey, as I'm not going to be like the U.S., as I won't do to you what the U.S. is doing to Venezuela, right? So I'm going to be a gentle giant.
The U.S. has surrounded China with military bases. I mean, this is not something new. Obviously, this started during World War II, maybe even really before World War II. The United States has been moving into this region of the world, and I mean, really, if you just look at any part of the world, the United States has military bases there. So, but it does seem like there's a great concentration around China. They even have names for it, like, the first island chain and the second island chain, and it's very specific to China. Why do you think the United States has done this, and do you think that this is in the interests of peace, or do you think this is in the interest of maintaining U.S. hegemony?
Yeah, the latter. It's, they just, there are parts of the U.S., the establishment, they see the world in a win-lose situation, and they don't like to compromise. They don't like to treat somebody as like an equal. Since World War II, they're so used to being the boss, it really pains them to sit with somebody, as an equal. They're like, Russia. No, Russia is just a gas tank with some nuclear weapons. China is just a communist country that's going to collapse. It's like they just cannot view facts objectively. Deng Xiaoping said, seek truth from facts. These people don't want facts. They don't want truths. And it's very dangerous, But I think that, so if I were to advise Beijing, I would say, don't do anything, okay? Don't start a fight, don't start a war, don't provoke, don't react, right? Like the Wu Wei philosophy from Taoism, do nothing, just to go with the flow. That's the best for China. Because if China does nothing for, say, another 20 years, the U.S. will be very weak by then, and then it'll be forced to retreat. So it'll be forced to retreat from the first island, second islands, and then soon they will be back home in 40 years. Right? So that's the best way for China. And obviously for the U.S., they don't want that to happen, right? They want to make sure that there is a war before the U.S. declines and China rises too much. So a lot of the things that we are seeing now about Taiwan, Japan, is basically that, One of the Japanese politician, he spoke in the parliament, and he basically said that Japan is a vassal state of the U.S. It's a colony of the U.S., So we all know that, but it's very shocking to hear that in Japan, because well, if you go to Japan and you talk to people, nobody will ever want to acknowledge that, So it's like something they don't want to talk about, but that's the truth. So China must realize that if Japan says something, whatever, it's because of something that's happening in the background, So there are these, the U.S. advisors. So the best thing for China is not to get pulled into a war and let the Western the hegemony slowly fade away.
You know, I was thinking this exact same thing. I was thinking about World War II, and basically the United States stayed out of the war in Europe for as long as it could, and the European powers decimated one another. By the time the United States did come in, they swept through because everything was already demolished. And I was thinking that's exactly what the United States wants in Asia. All the Asian countries to decimate one another, and the United States can just sweep right through again. And I agree with your assessment. All of the nation, I mean, there has been tremendous peace in Asia, despite some conflicts and some wars that have happened over the past few decades. There has been tremendous peace in Asia, especially East Asia, South Asia, Southeast Asia. If Asia wants to maintain its current development and continue its current prosperity, and all of these economies want to continue to grow, all they have to do is maintain the peace. And then, like, the West will wither away on its own over time. So I completely agree with your assessment. You've written that China is writing the rules of a multipolar world, and I'm curious about this term multipolarity. You took a trip to the Global South Media and Think Tank Forum when you said this. What is the Global Governance Initiative, which is being called GGI, and what are its features? Why is it important?
Yeah, so that's one of the four, I believe, four initiatives that came out of Beijing and President Xi Jinping. So like one was the global, the development initiative that focused on how to build infrastructure and all that, and then the global security initiative. It's about how the nations should resolve the conflicts, and then the global civilizational initiative, how to appreciate one cultures and to work together, and that's so beautiful, by the way. People should spend more time on that. And then the latest one, I think it came out this year, is the global governance initiative. So it's a really good philosophy. Like we talked about, like the good parts of geopolitics. How to view geopolitics in a philosophical way. So that's that, the GGI, and it talks about how countries must treat one another as the same, equals, regardless of the size, right, or the power. That's very difficult for some nations. They're like, what? No, well, I am the boss, and you are a nobody. You are Venezuela, and I shall crush you. And then the number two is to respect, multilateralism, right? To solve problems as a group, to work with many people to find common solutions. And it takes more time, like when you have to, say like if you have to do a trip, and you have to work with your wife and your brother-in-law and your sister-in-law, it takes more time. But eventually, when you all can agree, then the whole family is very happy. So that's multilateralism. And then it should be people-centric. What's good for the people, the average person. And that's also very hard these days because the decisions are all made by like lobbyists and by the 0.1%. And for them, if say, oh yeah, let's do the outsourcing of manufacturing from the U.S. to poor countries, and then they don't think for one moment, what does this mean to the tens of millions of blue-collar Americans? Right? So the people-centric is very, very important. And then, last but not the least, is to follow the laws of the world. So like we have to agree upon what are, the international rule of order, right? The U.S. Talks about that a lot. You listen to politicians; they always like rules-based order, and then you go, "Wow, that sounds wonderful." We have the order. That's good. We all want some order, and it is rules-based. How wonderful! And then you say, Mr. Marco Rubio, do you have a website where the rules are listed? No, there's no listing. Why? Because we make up the rules as we go. And it's a huge problem. We don't know what the rules of the world are. So whether you could say, but Taiwan, for example. What are the rules? It's like so confusing, but Taiwan is in like a limbo, and you hear people on this side, people on that side, they argue, and you cannot figure out what the facts are, there are so many different types of facts, There are some facts that are true facts. And then there are subjective facts, like you talk to 4 people and you get 4 different facts. And then there are facts that you cannot really talk about, or so at least, politicians cannot talk about. Right? So, for example, if you talk to the U.S. military, they will say bluntly, yeah, we are going to defend Taiwan. We are going to sell weapons. We are going to train the Taiwanese to defend Taiwan. And then you talk to think tanks. They will say bluntly, like they will talk about the first islands. They'll be like, no, once Taiwan falls and then the whole first island falls, we cannot allow that to happen. But those facts, they cannot be said by some people, like for example, the president of the U.S. can never say that. But he will do like a wink and a nod, and he will let the military, the media, think tanks say that. So there's all this,
right.
And then, like they will say, yes, we believe in one China, and but Taiwan is a part of China. Then why are you sending weapons? So it's like such a mess, and there's no rules, and we have to figure out the rules, because if we don't have proper rules, it's like playing a soccer, football, and there are no rules. People just make up rules as they go along.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, that does sound like the GGI. In terms of the GCI, the Global Civilization Initiative, I also hope a lot more can be done. I feel like there was a book, maybe you don't know it, I'm not sure. It's called Provincializing Europe. I think it's a Bangladeshi philosopher who teaches in the United States. And basically it was the idea that we've spent the last several hundred years looking at ancient Greece and ancient Rome and all of these European philosophies, and we look at Plato and Aristotle. But where are the philosophers from elsewhere? Even if you look at U.S. philosophy departments, you go to the philosophy department, it's like Heidegger or Nietzsche or some other Western philosopher, but you don't hear from philosophers from Africa or South Asia or East Asia. You don't read, Lao Tzu or Sun Tzu or whatever. You just read Western philosophy. How is that philosophy? How is it? You're studying philosophy and you're ignoring 90% of the world. So I think the GCI is really necessary also. I do want to pivot. I want to ask you about how this multipolar world works. How are things changing? Let's just go really far back so it makes more sense. Let's say 1980s, you look at Asia, it's completely undeveloped. South Asia is undeveloped. Southeast Asia is undeveloped. China's not developed. Maybe Japan is developing, at that time. most of the world is completely undeveloped except the imperial powers. You fast forward to today, it's a stark contrast. All kinds of countries have all kinds of new levels of development, manufacturing, high level technologies. They're not just coming out of China, but they're coming out of all kinds of countries. Dozens and dozens of countries now have manufacturing capabilities that are rising. How does the world landscape change? How has it changed? Does that mean that the former imperial powers are less powerful in today's world, and developing nations, which are more developed, have more power?
Yeah, like you said, if you go back to 1980s and you look at, say, China's GDP and compare that to Britain, France, Germany, Spain, Italy, it was nothing. You can't even find that in the chart. And now China's GDP is more than all those countries combined, right? Like you take UK, France, Germany, Italy, Spain, all the great nations in Europe, and you put them all together, they're still minuscule compared to China. And they don't have the technology, like whatever charts you look at, say scientific papers, patents, manufacturing, software, smartphones, laptops, whatever, all the basic things. Where is Europe? Like, what is coming out of Europe? The only thing that I buy from Europe is cheese. They make a wonderful cheese, but I don't have a lot of European gadgets in my home. Do you have?
I can't think of one.
Yeah, it's so sad, right? Like when you went to school, when I went to school, I was a science nerd. I loved physics and math, and all the formulas that they came from Europe, right? Like whatever you study, you say Newton's laws, you study thermodynamics, you study math, chemistry, all the formulas, everything had a name from Europe. Oops. Yeah, see? Welcome to India. And now I don't have electricity. So, hold on 1 second. So let me see if this helps.
Sure.
So does this help? Yeah, so that's the problem, So the world is changing a lot. Those countries that used to be poor are now getting smarter and richer. But if you look back over the last 2,000 years, then you wouldn't be surprised, because China used to be the number 1 or 2 biggest GDP, and you look at all the scientific innovations. So I've been to the museums in China, and they have the artifacts from 2,000 years ago, 4,000 years ago, like the Bronze Age, blah blah, and you see these like amazing technologies, and you go, wow. So how did they do this? Like 1,500 years ago, or even 4,000 years ago, and they have these like amazing potteries and vessels and statues. So you know that this is kind of reverting back to the traditional history. And if you just look at the population, so say China has 1.4 billion people, why should it not be more powerful than the U.S., which has like 1/4 the population? Because, but traditionally, the population was very, very directly correlated to the power of like an empire. So, if you look at Roman Empire, Greek Empire, whatever, it was very, very, there was a direct correlation. And we kind of lost that after, the Industrial Revolution, which led very small countries like Britain, Netherlands, Belgium. Like Belgium had like huge lands, and Netherlands was like a world empire. The Dutch countries, they were so smart. They built amazing ships. They figured out the stock market, and they had all these amazing technologies, and they were able to rule vast lands of the earth. So that's not going to happen anymore. So there is a brave new world in a positive sense. So it's not very dystopian, but there is a brave new world out there that is based on the developing nations. But I'm also worried that whether the developing nations have the wisdom to get along with one another. Because it just so happens that when the countries get a little bit rich, the leaders get so cocky, and then they may start to fight with one another. Like say, like if you go, to Africa, it's now sort of peaceful. But then, what if, say, like Sudan, there's been a problem in Sudan. It's like a civil war, and then the rest of the world does nothing. In a multipolar world, we have to depend on the people being sensible, because you would not. So, well, as much as people say bad things about the U.S. and its bullying nature, well, it has played a very key role in stabilizing the world. So if you have, say, war between, say, Turkey and Greece, okay? So both countries are now behaving because of the pressure from the West. And if, say, if there's no NATO, if there's no, the U.S. empire, maybe Turkey and Greece will go to war. And there are so many situations like that. So say, like my country, India and Pakistan. What is preventing them from going to another war? So like if there's no pressure from the U.S. or the West, somebody to threaten both countries into not fighting, then maybe there'll be a war between India and Pakistan. So, a multipolar world is great, but then the problem is that people should know how to behave, how to think wisely, and not get carried away by their newfound power and wealth.
I that's very peaceful and philosophical. I hope that you're right about us being able to manage our differences. On that note, I wanted to ask about the August SR meeting in New Delhi, where India and China reached a 10-point consensus. Because the last time I had you on the show, I asked you, and you said all we need to do is just freeze the border issue and just get along. So the two sides agreed to expand the scale of Indian pilgrimage to Mount, I hope I'm saying this right, Kailash and Lake Manasovar, starting in 2026. And there was a working committee on the border issue. How important have these dialogues been, and what can we expect from future dialogues and the relationship?
Yeah, so it's been fantastic. Like 1.5 years ago, if I say something positive about China on social media, I'll get a lot of heat from my fellow citizens. And that has stopped. So now, like, pretty much nobody screams at me, nobody calls me names. It's really amazing transformation. So now we have, the direct flights between India and China. And they had you on a show, right? Like one of the
That's
top.
right. Yes.
Yeah, it was a fantastic episode. I watched the whole thing, and you had so many smart suggestions about pollution, environment, green energy, and all that. But that's a very good change in the U.S., right? Like, like in India, they reached out to you to talk about what India can learn from China, and they let you speak for like 15, 20 minutes. This would have never happened in the past. So this is a wonderful, remarkable change that is happening in the psyche of the Indian media and the establishment. So I would say it's going well, but sometimes there will be some, border-related issues. So it'll be like, say, 4 steps forward, 1 step back, but it's still progress, And
Yeah, I'm hoping for more progress.
Right. I personally would love to see these two countries work together, which would be like 1.5 billion people in India, 1.4 billion in China. My God, the potential is just through the roof, and it will be wonderful for people of both countries and the world.
I want to continue this line of inquiry because I think it's extremely important too. I mean, it's almost half of the population of the world. Like as you pointed out, between these two countries, India and China are both members of BRICS. India and China are both members of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. And India's not in the Belt and Road Initiative. And it seems like you pointed out at the beginning of the show, there are bottlenecks in India's ability to draw in manufacturing, like electricity, telecommunications, and logistics infrastructure. Those are the exact kinds of infrastructure that the Belt and Road Initiative seeks to deploy. And China has 3.7 trillion dollars in forex and gold in dollars in forex. There's so much potential for, concessional loans on China's part to be an active player in the development in India. Is there any hope that we can see China and India working together to develop some of the infrastructure that India needs in order to become a manufacturing powerhouse?
Yeah. I don't, it makes no logical sense for me, why we should not bring China, right? So, because it's not like if you join BRI, then you have to spend $100 billion a year. There's no, the commitment, right? So you can join BRI and just say, hey, China, can you build the highway between these two cities? And that's all we want to do. China will do that. Okay, boom, right? And we have to learn from China, man. I see the roads here. They're so terrible. They're so terrible. You would not believe how terrible the regular roads are. Like full of potholes. And, and then the way they fix the potholes, you're like, man, did you go to college at all? Or do you have some sort of a degree, some sort of training on, how to, it's like a 5-year-old patching up the roads. And then but 2 months later, the potholes will be back. So we have terrible, terrible infrastructure. And just during our call, we had a power outage for 5-10 minutes. So now it's back. Why? This is just so ridiculous, and we can learn a lot from China. So maybe just make a pact. Hey, China, so come do stuff for 2 years, and then we watch you, we learn, and then we stop. And then we don't need to go to China because we've learned everything and we can do it ourselves. right? So I mean,
Yeah, there could
people
definitely be some
have,
trial projects. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I mean, people have to think pragmatic, and it's really. I mean, I see that on social media too. Like, people are so deranged and fanatical about everything. I'm like, dude, just think practical. I mean, like, you have all these ideologies. They're like, oh, like there's like a whole bunch of people who hate America. They're like, it's a toxic capitalist imperialist country that kills everybody. I'm like, come on, like, stop with like the hysteria. Yes, you can work with the U.S. A lot of countries work with the U.S. It's not all about total maniacal imperialism, toxic capitalism, whatever. So you have to find ways to work together, and yeah, like, yeah. I mean, you have to be like, with Deng Xiaoping. It's like, hey, well, I don't care if the cat is white or black. As long as it catches the mouse. And then you move slowly by feeling the stones you across the river. So like, we can do small projects with China, and China does wonderful things. Like, I've been to China. People are so polite, so nice, so professional, and like at the media forum that I went to. So they had 500 journalists from 100 different nations, okay, all like black, brown, and they even had a guy from the U.S. Okay, so China doesn't discriminate. There was a professor from the U.S., but but it was mostly the global South. And we had so many different things, planned every day. There were like 6 different events every day, starting from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. And not one was delayed, right? Like, everything works like, the clockwork. People are so professional, so on time, and they take things very seriously. Such wonderful people, and so that's something the developing nations should learn from. Because you cannot be lazy, and you cannot be like, yeah, I said I will start the job at 9 a.m., but maybe I'll show up at 11 a.m. And I said I will finish the job in 4 days. Yeah, but it may take 40 days. It's okay. You cannot be like that. You have, so there are like lots of things for the developing nations to learn.
I love doing these interviews with you because I always feel more optimistic about what's possible after we talk, because you are so conciliatory, so diplomatic, and you want people to get along. And, that's really refreshing in a world that is so complex and dark sometimes. Thank you so much for your time. I hope that we can have you back on the show. SL Kanthan.
Thank you, Jason. By the way, I
Yes.
think that you are far more diplomatic and far more positive than I am.
All right. Well, that's compliments all around then. All right. Thank you, my friend. Thank you so much for your
Thank you.
time, really.